This one?
Yeah,
We'll see shortly.
I have a couple clarifications to make from my statements yesterday concerning UEFI and enabling the CSM. David sent me some notes overnight. Let me do some editing here. Enabling the CSM, we're not using it to boot, does not have anything to do with BIOS services for ArcaOS. So I misspoke when I said it provides a more complete and emulated environment. However, it has to do with the way the BIOS configures the hardware in the system. So in other words, when you enable the CSM, it should provide a more BIOS-like environment that for interrupts and so on and so forth. Many BIOS change the memory, I/O, and interrupt configuration when the CSM is enabled versus when the CSM is not enabled.
Where's the camera? That's using this one, right?
In David's experience, for the BIOS that changed hardware configuration, the CSM-enabled configuration is more compatible with what ArcaOS needs, including in many cases more RAM available to ArcaOS. That's another limitation of a lot of the modern machines. It's not specific to UEFI, but a lot of the modern machines have memory maps and where we end up not able to see a full 4 gigabytes in the 32-bit memory space. We only see a portion of the memory in the machine, like 1.5 or 1.7 gigs.
Why is that? Do you have any idea what's going on there?
Well, there are. I'm not a memory mapping expert, so I'm not going to misspeak and say something that I shouldn't say.
So we can see.
But the essentially what happens is we hit a spot of memory that's used by something else,
So we can see.
and we need contiguous memory. We can't just skip over that and then you map that.
I see.
So we end up with a lowered ceiling.
And the CSM makes that, avoids that? Possibly?
Possibly on some system. It also does not mean that you must enable the CSM. It just means that you might get better hardware configuration if you do. It's very machine specific. In David's experience, GPT performance on ArcaOS may be about 50% slower than NBR. That's the overhead introduced by the filter driver. Again, I suppose it is hardware specific. And he says that this is regardless of whether it's spinning or solid state, and it's not affected by the type or speed of the media. So that's filter overhead. I mentioned about AN Launcher recognizing other operating systems. I phrased that inaccurately. Our installer recognizes the other operating systems and configures ArcaOS Launcher to add those to its menu. ArcaOS Launcher itself is completely agnostic and ignorant of any operating systems. And so insofar as trimming is concerned, David believes that trimming a JFS volume from Linux should work when you subsequently boot to ArcaOS. My guess is because the structures have already been changed under Linux, the changes have already been written, you just get a trimmed JFS volume when you reboot to ArcaOS. Of course, the problem is that many Linux distributions are doing away with the JFS driver. So not all Linux distributions can recognize your JFS partitions. That's pretty much the end of his commentary on my presentation. And I feel much better now because I knew that there were some things that probably needed some clarification. So with that, I'm going to turn everything over to John, and we'll let him wrap things up.
All right. What's